Hello everyone, welcome back to OCD Recovery's YouTube channel. As you can see, I'm in a little bit, I've done the spot twice now, but a little bit different of an outfit. Leave a comment down below if you like the lighting, what you think about the outfit, if you want to see me more in professional clothing. I always appreciate the feedback, and I read every single comment in all my videos, and I do appreciate everyone who watches my stuff, and hopefully it helps. So today I wanted to talk about somatic OCD again, aka sensory motor OCD or hyperawareness, whether it's a body sensation or a body part, which can kind of bleed over in the body dysmorphic disorder. It's why the two have such a high comorbidity together, which I have suffered with both simultaneously at the same time. So what I've been doing, if I'm not using my whiteboard, I have a list of the things I want to talk about right here, because the longer videos when I make longer videos, sometimes it's very easy to go off topic, which I have a tendency to do. So I have a nice list of 10 different things I wanted to talk about. But before I go any further, you can please subscribe down below. As many of you may know, we're converting into 10 different channels with 10 different languages, so we can reach sufferers all over the world, different experiences and stuff like that. So the list of the things I want to talk about today with somatic OCD and or sensory motor OCD are in no particular order by any means, but they all are very pertinent to the journey of somatic OCD. And for the remainder of the video, I will call it somatic OCD. So number one, what is somatic OCD? So somatic OCD, aka sensory motor OCD, aka hyperawareness, because it doesn't just have to be a natural body sensation. It could be the bridge of your nose, it can be a toe. A lot of people ask me, well, how do you tell the difference between if it's a body part, if it's body dysmorphia, or if it's sensory motor? And it doesn't really matter, because the recovery process is still handled the same way, through acceptance, exposures, and then going through time and letting the fear come down through rational thinking. So you don't really need to have a correct diagnosis per se. It does help, but it's not the end of the world if you don't have one. So usually the main ones are breathing, swallowing, blinking, salivating, and heartbeat. And then other ones could be sneezing, bridge of your nose, toes, body parts. Hence you could see the high comorbidity with body dysmorphic disorder or BDD. So it's basically a fear, chronically latched, of noticing a sensation. It almost feels like you're being waterboarded, if you know what that is. So when people used to ask me what was it like to be chronically stuck with saliva OCD, I was actually talking to another person in my profession today in the business meeting, and he said, well, what does that feel like? I said, well, take 2 Capri Suns and squish it underneath your tongue. The intrusiveness of that sensation all day long, 24/7, and doing all these other compulsions, which we will talk about. One thing I do want to talk about, there's some talk out there saying that it's hyper awareness, so it's not somatic OCD. That doesn't matter. That's all minute detail that detracts us from actually working on the fear and what's keeping us stuck. So there's a lot of noise out there with sensory motor OCD, somatic OCD, because it's not well understood, and not a lot of people suffer with it, such as maybe relationship OCD or harm OCD or pedophilia OCD. But there are a lot of people that have somatic OCD, and I've had people ask me, well, is it really this? Is it that? Then that doesn't matter. So if you have people arguing over the title of what it should be called, that is distracting you from what actually matters when it comes to getting better. The second thing I wanted to talk about, it's not a quick fix. I'll use myself personally. 2 years ago in 1 week or so, I was in the mental hospital, highly suicidal. So I've made tremendous progress in 2 years. But guys, it's 2 years. In the beginning of your journey, it's hard to think ahead. It's almost virtually impossible to think that long. So taking it moment by moment, day by day when needed is more than likely necessary in what needs to happen in the beginning of your recovery process. But it's not a quick fix. And I've heard a lot of really poor information surrounding somatic OCD, such as when people are talking about, oh, well, just distract yourself and just think stuff like, well, everyone salivates. And while this has validity in its usage, it can turn into a reassurance compulsion, and it actually moves in the opposite direction of acceptance. Because when you're trying to tell yourself that everyone salivates, you're trying to prove to yourself why it's okay if you salivate, but chronic OCD just will not let you off the hook with that for the majority of cases. Number 3, long-term distraction doesn't work. I see a lot of people that say in all OCD fears, if you just distract yourself all day, do this and do that, that's how you get better. And this is a misinformation. It's ill-guided in a lot of ways. When we talk about short-term distraction, we're talking about building healthy lifestyle habits, getting back out to work. There are people out there that say taking off work and relaxing is a good thing. It's more than likely not for the vast majority. If you're highly suicidal and you're a threat to yourself or others and these other scenarios that do represent some cases, then there is a validity to this scenario. But for most people, getting back to work and showing yourself that you can go back and do things is what you want to do. So getting in a decent sleep schedule, being cautious on the amount of caffeine. Not that caffeine makes your anxiety worse in the sense where most people say, I mean, it is a stimulant, but I just drank 4 shots of espresso at a business meeting like 2 hours ago and I'm completely fine. And I had an energy drink this morning. Don't tell my wife that. So, but yeah, so, and that's not the healthiest option, but it doesn't need to be, if you're afraid of it spiking things, so there has to be balance in your routine. And it doesn't have to be strict where, you see stuff where people are like, you have to get 8 hours or you'll relapse. And none of that's actually holds any validity at all. Number 4 is really important. You're not treatment resistant. Somatic OCD is one of those things kind of like pure O. I talk about pure O a lot. I think pure O is a pretty poor term, whereas an ROCD describes that it's relationship OCD, so you can kind of dive into what some of the characteristics of why you're fearful. We don't really need theme titles, but the particular theme titles show people in scenarios why they're scared of certain things, where pure O doesn't do that. Pure O is more in the lines of, I'm purely obsession-based, which is not true. It's called obsessive compulsive disorder. So if anyone is telling you that you have obsession-based OCD with no compulsions, they don't understand OCD. I have to be very frank about that. Your compulsions are what's called the internal thermometer, and I'll talk about that later, and I talk about that a lot. So you're not treatment resistant. Fear of fear is usually a play, and that's actually the next thing I'm going to talk about. So this is a nice crossover. So 5 is fear of fear is driving the cycle. And I'm going to talk about 5 and 6 as well, because they move together. So 6 is the sensation itself is not the driving factor. I had a great conversation with a friend of mine who has GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, who I had read Paul David's book, At Last of Life, just a friend in real life. And I said to them, if you knew that you were going to be more anxious than you've ever been for the next 90 days, 24/7, but you knew at the 90-day mark it would go away, how would you feel? She goes, it wouldn't bother me that much. I said, exactly. She was confused. She said, I'm confused. I said, it's not the sensation itself. The sensation itself is uncomfortable. The hyper-awareness somatic OCD is uncomfortable, but the fear of noticing it forever, the internal checking that you're doing, is actually the driving factor of what's keeping you stuck. This is a huge problem because many people miss over the fear of fear since it's subtle. And Paul David does a very good job of talking about this. So does Claire Week. So does Rob. I've talked about this a lot, including other moderators as well. So if you are afraid you're going to notice your sensation for the rest of your life, you'll more than likely check it in all sorts of scenarios when I talk about the internal thermometer soon. So it kind of just holds you back and doesn't get you to where you want to be. So fear of fear is a major driving factor of somatic OCD. Fear of it ruining birthday parties, ruining holidays, and all sorts of stuff like that. So it is important to talk about that. So number 7 is understanding acceptance. As many people know, we have 5 recommended books on the reading list. We have How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, Yes Anything by Ellis. Self-Help for Your Nerves by Claire Weeks. Then we have The Myth of Self-Esteem, Albert Ellis. Then we have Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And then we have Paul David's At Last of Life. There's other books out there that can be beneficial to your acceptance journey. I've read about 4 other books by Ellis that are not on the reading list that have helped me out tremendously with my anger in my relationship, realizing that I only have control over myself. I learned a lot from Viktor Frankl, Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and showing people that even when you're in a situation that might be uncomfortable or you don't like, your response is really the only thing that you have control over, which is a really amazing thing when you learn how to harness that type of acceptance. So the first book on the reading list was really beneficial to me because it taught me how to actually use and apply unconditional self-life and other acceptance. So when you're looking at disputing, we'll use a quick example for somatic OCD. So let's use myself. And it can become compulsive. Anything can become compulsive. I mean, anything, literally. So something that is, inherently more than likely good for you can become bad for you, especially if you have an addictive personality like myself. So this is why we talk about balance and lifestyle factors so much. So I had to look at, I was so afraid of being stuck forever and being chronically anxious that that heightened sensation because of the catastrophic thinking I had was really driving that cycle home. So I was constantly checking it all day long, constantly being like, oh, if I notice this for the rest of my life, I'm going to be stuck like this forever and it's going to ruin my life. When it wouldn't ruin my life because the actual definition of ruining one's living life is death. So it didn't actually make sense. And this is particular to this example, not suicide OCD or existential OCD. I'm talking about somatic OCD and the fear of it ruining your life. Well, when you break it down rationally, it can't ruin your life because ruining your life is death. So that doesn't make sense. On top of that, when you're going from place to place and checking, which I'm going to lead directly into number 8, which is the internal thermometer, I spend about 25% of my time speaking to people about the internal thermometer and them asking me, what is the internal thermometer? What do you mean by that? Well, what do I mean by the internal thermometer is this. You have a thermometer in your head. Let's see if I have anything over here. We'll just use this. So let's say this is the internal thermometer in your head. It has a little bit of sand and shells in here from the Jersey Shore where I grew up. So you're walking around, you have this thermometer kind of on a switchboard, like a grid. So when you have 100 of them, right? And every single thermometer you have is for different places that you go to. So you have a thermometer for the barber shop. I always use that example. It's an easy one. So you walk in, the thermometer starts to fizzle a little bit, right? And then you're like, am I going to feel it more today? Well, last time I was in this chair, I was really anxious. And it kind of is you're internally checking in all sorts of scenarios. And this is coupled with avoidance, which is number 9. So avoiding situations, not going to places in the fear of being anxious or the fear of potentially looking crazy. So there's other little things that kind of wind into the somatic OCD journey that many people are a little bit unaware of because it's subtle and it's hard to see. And it's hard for the sufferer to actually, verbalize what they're saying. So to the untrained eye, it might be like, what the fuck is this person talking about? Excuse my language, but necessary in that, oh my gosh, in something, whatever I was going to say. So it is important to talk about the internal thermometer, and it is important to talk about avoidance because the internal thermometer and the avoidance are actually the two biggest compulsions with the so-called pure O. And when you talk to someone and I start talking to them and I say to them, well, tell me about some of the things you do. And I start speaking about the internal thermometer, they start realizing, they say, oh shit, that's exactly what I do. I say, yeah, so you really don't have that many outward compulsions, which you more than likely do. You just don't know them because they're so subtle. Sometimes it may take you a year or so to even realize all the compulsive behaviors you have. Hence going back to number 2, why it's not a quick fix. So number 10 is relapses and letting yourself be distracted. There's a reason I put this for last. There's many people I see who will be suffering one moment and then say to me, I'm cured. I did the same thing. Remember, there's no cure for OCD, but there is recovery. You still have the genetic component, but it's like anything. The gene is no longer expressed, whether that's the mechanism of neuroplasticity and stuff like that, which doesn't actually need to be understood. The only people that need to truly understand that for their job are neurophysiologists, neurosurgeons, and these people that are actually working with neurology full-blown in the lab. So it's cool to know it, but it's not needed for recovery. You don't have to know anything about the thalamus, the prefrontal cortex, any of that stuff, any of the neural structures of the brain. It's just not necessary. Cool to learn because I'm a nerd, but you don't actually need it. So you more than likely will relapse. That's not to scare you, it's just to give you the reality of life. So I was reading or listening to a philosophical talk yesterday morning by a woman named Rand, and she was talking about how life has objectivity and then your perception of objectivity. So relapses are objective. They'll more than likely happen. Your perception and how you feel about them can either move with them or in the opposite direction, so which would be an opposite of an internal surrender. So this is really important to talk about because it gets people discouraged. In one minute, you could feel like you have everything figured out, and the next minute you feel like you're back at square one. So it is very important to talk about this stuff. And you have to let yourself be distracted. This is something I don't talk about a lot. And there's a lot of things out there, sufferers or not, that say, you know, whenever I'm feeling discomfort, whether you're a non-sufferer, I go and I distract myself. Well, this might be okay scenario for a non-sufferer. I still don't think it's the best option, but this is problematic for an OCD sufferer. So if you're in the conversation and you're super hyper aware about your blinking, it's just boom, boom, boom. You have to let that play out as best as you can, because if you don't let that play out, your brain basically has an understanding that you're scared. And in the beginning, it does feel like you're faking it and you're tricking yourself. That's how I felt, but you really don't really have any other option. And especially in the beginning, I took that from a couple of people that I took some information from in the community that I don't agree with fully everything they say, but there are things they say that I do agree with. So, you know, it's important to keep an open mind when it comes to somatic OCD, because there's just a lot of poor information out there. I've heard really ridiculous stuff on podcasts about people saying that they gave themselves somatic OCD for a few minutes to experience it. This is frankly absolutely fucking horseshit. And it's quite detrimental to the OCD sufferer who feels like they're being almost internally tortured all day long. So working on that fear, letting time go by, and going back out there and not engaging in avoidance behaviors is more than likely going to be your best bet. So let me know how you thought about this whole entire setup and the clothing. I'll have to go to the thrift store and buy some more jackets because this one's a little bit too big on me. But I did enjoy actually dressing like this for the video. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your support. The people who watch the video, whether you comment or not, I think it's important for myself to get the information out there and, you know, teach people through my experience of what I think works and what I think doesn't work. And I do want to talk about this. We do talk about this a lot. It's not on the list, but people do ask me about medications. I'm not a medical doctor, and I can't give you advice on that anyway. So you might as well want to ask your doctor, so the prescribing physician. The one thing I do want to say, though, is it does help take the edge off for a lot of people, and it's very beneficial. So if you're afraid of taking medications and the side effects, that's something as well you'll have to work on with your somatic OCD fears. And people ask me, did I ever take medications? I didn't. I wasn't against them. I just never took them. But I know plenty of people that take them and got great results while working on their fears and exposures and so forth and letting time go by. So thank you so much for watching. Again, I appreciate the support and have a great day.